This episode is appearing in the CI Immersion feed, but it's also appearing in the Listen, Read, Interact feed. And if you're seeing this in that one, the Listen, Read, Interact feed, and you're expecting a story, you're not going to hear one here. This is a teacher-facing episode, and we're talking about how it is that I teach language in this podcast series called CI Immersion. And if you're interested in how I teach language, then this might be for you. And if you're not interested in how I teach language and you just want to hear your Spanish stories, well, this one's not for you probably. Go find a different one. There's like 95 other episodes you can pick on the Listen, Read, Interact website, listenreadinteract.com. This is CI Immersion. It starts now. Why, hello there. Welcome to another episode of CI Immersion. My name is Andrew Snyder. I'm the host of the CI Immersion podcast. I am a Spanish language teacher, and now I am an English language teacher for speakers of other languages. I've been teaching ESL this summer and been having a great time doing it. And I always try to incorporate CI Immersion into all my classes, because what is CI Immersion? CI Immersion is my entire system for teaching languages in a way that is comprehensible for learners and a way that gets incredible results for them if they follow the steps in the sequence and in the process. And part of that is on me as the instructor. I have to create an environment that is comprehensible. I have to create an environment that is engaging and that is optimized for language acquisition. And that's what CI Immersion does. It takes a lot of the thinking and it front loads it so that by the time you get to the classroom, you are free to do the actual teaching and be in the moment and be present with learners and really get the hang of, and help them get the hang of the language in a fun, engaging, realistic, lifelike way and an environment that is low pressure. So that's what CI Immersion is. It's this entire system. And in a previous episode, we talked about kind of setting the scope or the sequence, what it is that you want to teach and what order do you want to teach it in, that sort of a thing. And this episode is all about a pre-storytelling phase of the process. Now, CI Immersion leans heavily on storytelling and story creation in the classroom as a way to drive forward acquisition in a natural way and at a natural pace for that particular class. What I mean by that is that the stories that we hear, the stories that we read, the stories that we watch on TV, those stories contain pretty much every grammatical structure, every relevant piece of vocabulary that anyone could ever want to hear or learn or acquire, as we say in second language acquisition theory. So a story is like the perfect vehicle for language acquisition. And furthermore, we are storytelling creatures. And before the written word, whenever that happened to have come about, which is just an abstraction of the spoken word anyway, but before the written word, that oral storytelling is how we transmitted language, and not just language, but information across time. So we transmitted information across time via stories. And because of that, they're like hardwired into us. I can put on a movie for, well, no, I got two kids. I've got two kids, and one of my kids is a little bit more into stories than the other one. They're both into stories, but one of them wants them for a specific reason, and the other one can just sit and watch and watch and watch and watch, or listen and listen and listen and listen. Sometimes we think she's not paying attention to the stories that we read her. Nope, she's paying attention. She can tell you everything that just happened, everything you just said, even if she looks like she's busy doing something else. So that and the stories are interesting and they're engaging and they're new and they're novel. I put on Rocky for her the other day, Rocky 2, and I got to a training scene. I thought my boy would really like it. He could take it or leave it, but my daughter was like, "Why'd you turn that off? Hey, I'm watching this now. This is good. I want to keep watching this." And so it just depends on the person and how the story resonates with that person, but storytelling indeed is like this very natural way that we transmit information across time, but also how we learn about the world. And so it's hardwired into us. We're built as storytelling creatures. We love story in general. And so, for example, I'm in my ESL classroom this summer. I'm teaching ESL 4, so they're a little bit more advanced, and we just started making up a soap opera together. And we've got a couple of characters, and I've written out some like kind of book chapters that would be a little bit more advanced, perhaps, but they're very structured in class, and they're very based on the stuff that we've been talking about in class. And it ties back to the theme of the quarter, which is Washington State history, since I've been at Washington State. And so we have all of these interesting elements that are combined together. I'm pulling in elements from the culture. I'm doing all of these things in terms of vocabulary and showing them maybe some phrases that they might hear, some idioms that come in context, and that sort of a thing. So it's so much fun for me. I can tell the learners are engaged. I can tell that they're acquiring information. I'm pushing them in terms of their reading skills in English. And I do this in my Spanish classes as well. Now, the Spanish classes that I teach tend to be towards the beginner side. And yet, you're able to get quite complicated language and make it understandable for learners simply by following the CI immersion process that we're going to detail the pre-storytelling phase of it today. And this is the foundation. This is the thing that's going to get us to that storytelling phase, which will be next episode. And the pre-storytelling phase is so important because you're teaching high-frequency vocabulary. You're teaching words that repeat themselves over and over and over again. And it depends on the language that you teach, how that's going to look. So for an English class, if you're teaching ESL, if you're teaching English as a second language, then you're going to want to focus on those high-frequency words, which are like is, am, are, was, were, be, being, been, has, have, had, do, does, did, will, would, shall, should, can, could, may, might, must. I'm sure there's more on that list, but there's 23 for you right there. Is, am, are, was, were, be, being, been, has, have, had, do, does, did, will, would, shall, should, can, could, may, might, must. And those are some helping verbs. I would call them helping verbs, auxiliary verbs. What do you call them? The term is escaping me. Regardless, I'm a language teacher. I should know this. But those words are super high frequency. They occur in every text you will ever read. They're so high frequency. They're so important for learners to understand and become familiar with and be able to use at will. If you're teaching a language like Spanish that has this rich verb morphology, well, yes, you're going to have the same kinds of concepts and ideas, but you're going to have to use different structures in there. But you can chunk some phrases out. Like if you want to teach the word debería, you can teach the word debería. That's not a hard word to say. Debería. It's 4 syllables. And if you can figure out that it means I should. And then maybe eventually we figure out what that ia means because we've heard it in context. Or maybe we hear the word podría. I know it's not in your textbook for chapter 4 or chapter 1 or chapter 2, but maybe you could, podrías, maybe you could include that word in some sort of pre-storytelling phase. And so when it comes to story time, which is this glorious process of co-creating fiction out of thin air, it's just captivating. We'll talk about it in the next episode. But if you can pre-teach some of this high-frequency vocabulary, then when you get to the story phase, you can reinforce that vocabulary in a natural way, in its natural habitat, in its naturally occurring environment. So this pre-storytelling phase, pre-storytelling phase, it really has a couple of parts to it. And one of the parts that it has, I would say, is a student-driven input. And so on the first day of class, I will tend to hand out a name tag because it's one of my systems that I use. I have difficulty memorizing people's names unless I hand something back to them every single day. And if I hand something back to them every single day, and in this case it's the name tag with the name that they prefer to be called, then I can have a conversation with them. I can try to memorize names as I am taking attendance this way. They're working on something else perhaps. But that is a fantastic idea and something that I've picked up. It's a great system for memorizing names, but it's also a great system for making people feel welcome. It's also a great system for getting some learner-driven input, because I might learn something about the learners as I go through the classroom and hand out these name tags. Now, I'm going to be targeting high-frequency vocabulary during all of this, and I'm obviously going to be checking on learners' comprehension a lot in this phase. I want to make sure that they understand what I'm saying in the target language. Now, in my classroom, I try to do 100% Spanish if I'm in a Spanish class, 100% English if I'm teaching ESL. If I were to teach Portuguese, I'd want to try to do 100% Portuguese. Now, I know that if you're teaching, you're often, and your learners all have the same native language, or most of them do, you're going to get that native language to creep in. It just naturally occurs. Someone wants to take the path of least resistance, which is a normal human tendency, and they'll just look to their neighbor and say, what does that mean? And you got to try and drill that out of them. You got to try and say, no, I know it's on, and you can put pause. I will do this a lot. I'll be in my classroom, and it will be 100% in Spanish, and then I want to communicate something way too complex for their current language level. And so I'll say, pause. And then I will return and I will say, I know you're so tempted to do that, and it's totally normal to want to speak English with your partner. They would look to your partner. But if you let your partner process in their brain what I'm saying to you, then you will never be able to understand what I'm saying. Like, you'll slow yourself down. You'll put yourself behind because you're letting your partner do the mental processing. And I know it's hard work and everything, but we need to make sure that you're doing it. And so you try to make this really low stress environment, and you try to let people know, no, it's okay. It's normal, but you're the one that has to do the information processing. You're the one that has to understand these messages that I'm saying. And so your job is to tell me if you don't understand. So you give everyone that job, and especially if you see someone struggling, slow down and kind of teach to these students who are struggling along the way. So with this, the student-driven input, the name tag that I hand back also has some sort of drawing that they'll do on it. And there's 100 different ways or 1,000 different ways you could probably do this learner-driven input phase. And so I'm not saying that my way is the only way, but it is a good way and it's an effective way. And so, for example, in my Spanish 1 class, I might have them draw an animal that they have or that they want to have. Now, this is student-driven, high-frequency vocab. And so we have the word have in there. And in Spanish, we might say tengo, I have, or tienes, you have, or tiene, he has or she has, or you have formal. And so there's now a bunch of things we can teach just with tengo, tienes, tiene. But we also have some people drawing an animal that they want to have. And I make sure that I draw an animal myself that I want to have. And so now I can insert myself in the conversation. I can talk about myself and teach the I have, tengo, or I want, quiero, based on what it is that I want. And I happen to have in my hand right here a small figurine of an elephant. And I will say, I have an elephant or I want an elephant. And generally it's I want, because I want them to see me model and hear me model things that I want, so that when I ask them, they're able to say it. And that confusion of wanting to use that you form, the tú form, when I say, ¿quieres un elefante? And they'll respond back to me, sí, ¿quieres un elefante? That is a normal phase that people go through when they're picking up language. My own son did that when he was learning Spanish when he was a baby. he would respond in the tú form all the time because he didn't have any other examples. We'd always ask him, ¿Tienes hambre? ¿Qué quieres comer, mi amorcito? ¿Qué quieres comer, mi amorcito? So it's a normal phase, but my daughter didn't go through that because it was like a week of it. She went through in like a week. And it's because she heard him talking about himself. And so it's just quickly, she figured that out. Oh, I don't have to talk about you. I can talk about I because I want to talk about I. And she heard these conversations between my son and myself, or my son and my wife, or my wife and me. And so she passed through that phase very quickly. All right, so high frequency vocabulary. And obviously you can teach I am, you are. And in Spanish, we have the two versions of that, soy and estoy. You want to teach all of this in this pre-storytelling phase. And I think with those four verbs, maybe a little bit of haber, there is, there are, hay. And then ser, estar, tener, querer. To be, to have, to want. And a few forms of that if it's in Spanish. Now in English we have is, am, are, was, were, be, being, been, and we have these different ways of expressing some of these things, but Spanish has this rich verb morphology, and so I would say those three forms, soy, eres, es, estoy, estás, está, tengo, tienes, tiene, quiero, quieres, quiere, are super critical in this phase. And if that's all you get out of this pre-storytelling phase, you're going to be in pretty good shape because there's going to be lots more chances for you to do this pre-storytelling phase again before the next story. So this is something that happens before each story that you tell. And sometimes it's going to be quick and sometimes it's going to be longer. To start a story, I would do this pre-storytelling phase probably a week or two. And you can even add some light storytelling in there, but they're just going to be kind of ephemeral, not necessarily going to read these ones. They're just going to be kind of short images. I've heard, some like images. Maybe you'll like describe somebody. Maybe you'll see a picture on the board and you put a picture up there and you describe that person. Or now with AI, you can describe a person out loud and then make a picture of them the next class and show them the picture and review kind of what you did. So there's some really great tools that you can do and use to get this pre-storytelling phase really hammered home for learners. And our goal really for here is moving people from 0 to 1. Because if you have no language to work with, then no language that you hear is going to be comprehensible. And if you don't hear comprehensible messages, if you don't hear messages that you can understand, then you will not start to develop a language system internally. You have to hear messages that you can understand to get your hooks into that language. And so this pre-storytelling phase is essential because you are getting learners to get their hooks into the language a little bit. It's their first movement up the rock wall as they're rock climbing. And you have to get that first one before you can get the next one and the next one and the next one. You have to get your footing. And so this is what's the tricky part is. But once you're up there on the wall, it's a little bit easier, isn't it? You ever been rock climbing? It's been a fair number of years since I've been rock climbing. I hear it's good for you. I should maybe start again. Another really critical piece to this pre-storytelling phase is total physical response, TPR. Total physical response is simply tying the meaning of a word in L2 to a physical movement, a gesture. And I will pick out some words and phrases that I want learners to know before we start storytelling together. And that's because I generally have a skeleton script outline, at least in my head, and when I'm storytelling. So I know kind of where the story is going to go, although there's so much freedom and so much personalization that goes into this method, the CI immersion method, that it often takes its own direction. And maybe we don't use every single one of the TPR words, but I want to pre-teach some phrases at least. And so I will pick between 3 and 6 phrases. And they might be something like no puedo, or estoy enfermo, or something like trabaja. So I'm going to add some vocabulary, some gesturable vocabulary that learners are going to pick up quickly. And we're going to add that to the high frequency vocabulary that we've targeted. So I've got estoy, estás, está, soy, eres, es, tengo, tienes, tiene, quiero, quieres, quiere. We've got those different phrases that we've targeted. Now let's say we'll add ba, ba-a. We're going to add no puedo and trabaja and quiere llorar, posiblemente. Maybe something like that as well. So a handful of high-frequency verbs, typically, or verb phrases, or something that's gesturable, something you can create a gesture for and tie meaning to it. And I will tell you that when I was learning Spanish many years ago, my teacher taught with stories. They were all pre-written stories, and so he had memorized them. They were in our textbook. There's a great textbook called Dime Dos, if you can remember that textbook from maybe you taught with it one time. Or maybe you know someone who taught with Dime. You can still find copies of it. I've got a copy here somewhere. It's on my shelf. It's that good of a book. But he would take the stories that were in the text, and they had like little vignettes, little frames that had pictures on them, and then the captions were the story. And he would memorize those stories, and then he would look at the stories and he would take out lists of about 20, 25 words or phrases. And this was a really powerful textbook because it recycled the vocabulary and it just naturally does that. When you storytell, when you tell stories, you're going to naturally recycle phrases, you're going to naturally recycle verbs and other vocabulary. It's great. Storytelling is fantastic. It's a fantastic way to teach. It's a fantastic way to learn stories. But these gestures, these words, we'd make gestures for them, and we would decide as a class. And there would be like 20 of them, and then we'd take a quiz where he would just pick 2 of them. All right, now tell me I'll show you the gesture, you tell me what the word was. So if the word was ba, it might have been like that, and you put your hands together and you clap them and put one hand forward quickly. So like it's shooting out in front of it's shooting out in front of you. Ba, ba. And so he would show you that gesture and you would say ba. And I will tell you that this is one of the best ways to acquire vocabulary. And the reason that it's one of the best ways to acquire vocabulary is that you are actually short-circuiting the English definition. If you're teaching Spanish, you're short-circuiting the English definition simply by making a gesture. So, for example, if we look at it, let's look at it like this. So, when I teach this, let's say I teach a phrase, I teach the word ba, and ba-a would be my phrase. I would make sure they see the a. The a goes with ba a lot of times in Spanish. So, ba-a, ba, or voy-a, or vamos-a. There's lots of different versions of it. But let's say I just teach ba. I tell them what it means right up front. I say, okay, this word ba and this phrase ba means goes to. He goes to, she goes to, and you go to formal. Ba. Ba-a. Then we make up a gesture for it, which we said before is our clapping our hands together and one hand shoots out in front of the other, and that's kind of ba. So we've got the Spanish word they hear and the Spanish phrase ba. We've got the gesture that they see and feel because they're doing the gesture along with me. I make everybody do it with me. And they have the English definition at first. Okay, perfect. The next time, there's no English definition. I don't repeat what the definition is. I just say ba, and they do the gesture. Boom. We have short-circuited English from the equation, your brain no longer needs to go from Spanish, English, gesture. It just goes Spanish, gesture. Then when I flip it around and I show you that shooting forward gesture, then your brain automatically says ba. It goes from gesture back to Spanish, and English is no longer in the mix. This is a very powerful tool, and it ties it to long-term memory because learners are hearing it, they're feeling it, and they're seeing it. You're incorporating multiple senses and tying those multiple senses to a meaning that they can feel in their bodies. So it's a really powerful tool for acquiring vocabulary very quickly. And in this pre-storytelling phase, the initial one, obviously before every storytelling phase, I have a small TPR unit. But in the initial one, right at the beginning of class, that will take between 1 and 2 weeks of class, I have between 25 and 50 TPRable, gesturable words or phrases that I incorporate into the high frequency vocabulary. And I like these to be entertaining for when people are actually standing up and moving. So if I say, we always start with the levántate and siéntate, and that's a lot of fun to have people stand up, sit down. I have a lot of people, I'll point to them, hey, levántate, okay, siéntate, levántate, siéntate. Same person over and over. I have them standing up and sitting down over and over and over again. Those words get picked up quickly. And we can teach words that are fun, like grabs, agarra, or dance, baila. And these are like 2 commands that we'll teach, just like you would talk to a kid and say, hey, you do this thing. Hey, eat that. Run over here. Do this. Don't do that. And you can teach those commands right away as chunks because they're not going to necessarily understand in the first week what a tu command is. I've tried to explain this so many times very early in a class, and I'll even put the pause on. Like, hey, no, these are like things you would say to your friend. Hey, you do this thing for me. And they don't understand that. There's so much information they're taking on board that the grammar gets lost. So don't worry about teaching grammar in this phase. Don't worry about teaching grammar at all. Focus on the message. Focus on what you're trying to communicate and let them process simple messages in Spanish or English or French or German, whatever language you happen to be teaching, Portuguese. Yes, let's talk a little bit more about this. So, along with all of this, there is an important skill that I think is probably the most important skill. So we've got some high-frequency vocabulary, but we can't just say it once and they have it acquired. That's not how it works. We know that. It's going to take some more time. And so I think for the most bang for your buck, the best thing that you can learn how to do is to do what I call orbiting. Now, what is orbiting? Orbiting is a way to use a sentence like a planet. And what I mean by that is, if you've ever seen space travel and like this idea of slingshotting, if you've ever seen the movie Apollo 13, or if you've heard about Apollo 13, that mission where the astronauts had to get back home and they had problems with their spacecraft, they had to use the gravity of the moon to slingshot themselves back toward Earth. And in terms of language acquisition, a lot of people will call this circling. I've heard that called. That I prefer the term orbiting, but you know, different strokes for different folks. And I like the term orbiting because really what you're doing is you're taking this sentence, a structure, a basic sentence, and that basic sentence is like the gravity of a planet. It is like the center of a planet. And we're just going to go and we're going to orbit around this planet for a while. We're going to ask questions about this sentence in a number of different ways and from different angles as we circle around it until we get bored. And then we're going to use the momentum that we pick up orbiting this planet to slingshot ourselves to another sentence, to another planet in the solar system, which is a different sentence. And that sentence we're going to talk about for a while. And really, the way that this works is you want to start with a sentence in L2, whatever L2 is, that contains the vocabulary that you want to target. So if you want to target va a la universidad, va a la universidad, he goes to the university. Then you want to start with that sentence, and you want to say that sentence, and you want to make sure people understand that sentence. Then you're going to ask questions about it, and they can be a question that is yes or no, for example, and you might have an affirmative answer to that. You might say, yes, he goes to the university. You might have a no question about that, where the answer is no, where it's like, does he go to the university in Washington? Or does he go to the university in Washington? Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he goes to in Vermont. No, he goes to the university in Vermont. Okay. Does he go to the university in Vermont, or does he go to the university in Montana? We have an either or question. And these either or questions are great because now the answer is not just yes or no. The learner has to think. And then once you're circling around, you're orbiting around this word, this phrase, this topic, this one sentence, and once most people are on board and you kind of are gauging that by the responses in the class, you're maybe walking around the classroom, you're pointing to different people, then you might be able to ask an open-ended question. Does he like going to the university in Vermont? And the students get to decide at this point whether or not this person likes going to the university in Vermont. And in this pre-storytelling phase, you can ask these questions about a learner. So like at the very beginning, you might say, class, I'm very sad. And then a learner might ask, hey, why are you sad? Why? Why are you sad? Class, I'm very sad because I do not have an elephant. And the class kind of chews on that for a while. Some people will probably giggle because why does this crazy teacher want an elephant? Well, I just do, okay? I just do. Class, do I want an elephant? Yes, they say. Yes, you want an elephant. Class, do I want an elephant or do I want a dog? They think about an elephant. Ah, yes, an elephant. I want an elephant. Class, do I want a dog? And some people might say yes, but I'm going to say to them, no, I do not want a dog. That's silly. I want an elephant. Class, do I want a small elephant or a big elephant? And people say big elephant. Ah, no. I don't want a big elephant. I want a small elephant. Class, why do I want and it might have to teach big and small, right? So it depends on where your level is, but you're able to teach in context a lot of vocabulary very quickly. Now we're teaching adjectives. We're describing this elephant. I might ask a learner, hey, do you want an elephant? And then I have to teach, do you want? ¿Quieres? And I have to teach, he wants or she wants. Quiere. Esa persona quiere un elefante. Esa persona no quiere un elefante. And so you're able to teach language in context, high frequency stuff. It's learner-centered, learner-driven during these first handful of class periods together. Either it's 1 week or 2 weeks. If you're in a high school or junior high, you could teach for 2 weeks easily on this, probably longer. But at the college level, you're kind of bound to go quickly. You're just bound to go quickly, and that's just the way that it is. I have a picture here of a Fibonacci sequence I'm looking at. I don't know, I'm probably not going to put it in the show notes, but you can think of a Fibonacci sequence. Maybe I'll find one. And You've seen them before. It's that spiral circle, and it's all about circles. So it's kind of this orbiting nature where you start out very small and you're able to orbit a small amount of vocabulary, small amount of phrases. But as you add more and more and you orbit more and more and more, this thing spirals out and spirals out. And all of a sudden you have a lot more language that's inbounds for you. Language that is comprehensible. And the key to this whole thing is to keep that little spiral at the beginning. As you spiral outward, you want to keep it tightly wound at the beginning because you don't want to drown your learners in incomprehensible language. You want them to feel comfortable with the target sentences. You want them to feel relaxed. You want them to be able to go leave your classroom and be thinking about those phrases, just unable to not think about those phrases. Because if you're comprehending language and you're having fun and you're getting that dopamine response, not from a screen, but from a real interaction with other people, then you're going to be thinking about that. You're going to be happy. You're going to be engaged. It's going to be a win for everyone. And you kind of go through this little honeymoon phase as you're learning in these first few weeks, and the learners are picking stuff up in the first few weeks. It's so much fun. Now, there's a way to think about this that keeps things fresh, because there's these 4 types of questions, right? There's the affirmative answer question where you know the answer is a yes. There's a negative answer question where you know the answer is going to be no. There's an either or question where the learners have to pick between a couple things. Then you kind of have this open-ended idea, and the open-ended one can be, like, what do I want? Oh, I want an elephant. You can teach those W words: who, what, when, why, where, and how, the famous other W word. Guess there's one at the end. How. Yes, so this is the trickiest part probably of storytelling to get good at. Because if you can it's hard at first because there's these different kinds of questions, and you should try to mix them up. If you just go in order every single time, students pick up the order and they can just guess the answer. It's like Duolingo. Duolingo, after a while, you don't even have to read the sentence that it's asking for. You can just kind of guess what it's asking for because there's an order to it. It's not very good, to be honest. It's okay. I mean, I don't want to knock it because it does do some things well, but I do want to knock it on the other hand because it's boring. But the affirmative question, negative answer question, the either or question, and then that open-ended, what do I want? Who wants an elephant? Do you want an elephant? And then kind of talk about learners as well. So this orbiting business is probably the trickiest bit to get going in this pre-storytelling phase. It takes the most upfront work from you as the instructor. You have to figure out how to make this thing work for you and for your learners, but it is well worth it. It is well worth it because once you have this tool in your tool belt, you'll be able to continue on a conversation forever and ever and ever and ever if you want to or need to. You can extend classes indefinitely this way. And this summer, for example, with my ESL students, we're learning about Washington State history as a theme. And I had the bright idea, I'm co-teaching this class. And so 2 days a week I teach and 2 days a week another person teaches. And I had the bright idea to teach about Mount St. Helens because I thought, well, a volcano eruption, that sounds pretty interesting. And my colleague had already taught about it the day before. But there I was with an hour and a half left, and my lesson plan was no good. It was worthless because they knew everything I was going to teach them already. So it would have been okay to repeat it, I suppose, but how boring for them to repeat the same thing. Although it was interesting, and I did show them the eruption. I don't know if they saw it, but I showed it to them one more time. It's like, man, this is crazy. Crazy eruption. But instead, I was able to use this skill of asking questions and asking questions with an affirmative answer, questions with a negative answer, questions with an either-or answer, and questions with an open-ended structure with one of the W words: who, what, when, why, where, or how. And that's just, it's like a freebie. It's like, okay, well, yeah, my lesson plan was shot. I spent a lot of time making that, some amount of time making that. And it's okay, though, because now I have this other tool in my tool belt I can fall back on, and we can really get some comprehensible language to process. And it's all learner-driven as well, because once you get into the storytelling phase using this, then learners drive the story forward, and it's personalized to them. Okay, that is a lot of information to take in, and you can check out the show notes page for this. There's a link in the episode description. You can also find it on listenreadinteract.com, and it's episode number 4 of the CI Immersion podcast. Next time, hopefully that'll be soon. Hopefully there'll be a smaller gap this time between episodes. We're going to talk about the storytelling phase and really how to make this the most fun you'll ever have teaching, and the most fun learners will have acquiring language in your classroom. This is the feedback that I get quarter after quarter, that this was the most effective thing for pupils acquisition, and it was the most fun thing, and it was the most entertaining thing, and it was the most engaging thing. And it's just the nature of it. Just the nature of the beast. So with that, I'm going to leave you. And we have some other stuff coming up in the future as well. I do have an episode planned about assessment and how I use assessment in the CI Immersion system, because it really is a complete system for language acquisition and for language teaching. And I have a feeling that one's going to be very popular. So stay tuned, and I'll tell you all about how I grade stuff and how I approach grading and what I think about grading and all of that stuff. So thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. I hope that it's been informative. I hope that it's been helpful. If you have any questions or comments, you can always email me. You can email me at, what's my email? It's Andrew, ANDREW, at readtospeak.com. Andrew at readtospeak.com. Muchas gracias. Muito obrigado. Merci beaucoup. Danke sehr. Thank you. We'll see you next time.